audits of open source privacy technology. And eventually, folks from Least Authority partnered with the Zcash scientists and created the Zcash company. And that's how we got here. But early on at Least Authority, we were all very aware of Bitcoin when it came out, and we were all very excited about it for various reasons. But one thing is it just hit a lot of the same technical buttons that we were already focused on with decentralized, secure, peer-to-peer storage systems. So there's just kind of a natural technical affinity, but also it was this new application, money, and it seemed to be gaining momentum. So we were very excited about that. And pretty soon, we also heard about Ethereum. Ethereum was quite interesting to us because Bitcoin was sort of showing, hey, there's this new sort of consensus system that's self-reinforcing with incentives. This new design is possible, and it sort of blew people's minds. And then Ethereum was like, the second sample of the design space, and it's kind of a nice sample because they just changed every possible design axis, so it seemed like a little wild or crazy, but at least it's good to kind of have a range across the design space to see what happens. So then shortly thereafter, we heard about Zcoin and Zcash, and we were excited about those, and eventually the company was formed. So here's a bit more of a timeline, kind of repeating what I just said. An interesting historical point for me was going to Real World Crypto at the beginning of 2014. So that's where I saw Matt give a presentation about Zcash. And that's also where I saw a presentation about Ethereum. Another thing is I met somebody in person that I had been collaborating with a little bit online. His name was Strad. And he was a person wearing a balaclava and black glasses the entire conference. And so I knew I had, found the right community, basically. So then by later in 2014, it was pretty clear that we were going to do this partnership with the Zcash scientists and make this thing a real thing people could use. So the company was created in 2015, and we started trying to make the academic code base into a real product. By the beginning of 2016, we had a public alpha people could experiment with. And by the end of 2016, we launched 1.0, which we call Sprout. So now here's just a bunch of dates with a bunch of releases. All of the 1.0 releases are implementing the Sprout protocol. And this is over a time span of like a little less than a year and a half. And there's, I think, 17 releases here. So our engineering team was very busy at making like rapid, small changes to adjust what we had deployed and make sure it was safe. And there's two that are like colored differently. The version strings end with a -1. That means those are hot fixes. So there was an urgent issue or bug that we needed to sort of rush out a fix for on a short time span instead of our normal release schedule. After all of those 1.0 Sprout releases, we've started releasing the overwinter releases. So those begin with 1.1. And the first thing you might notice is that there were like 17 of these other Sprout releases. There were 3 releases for overwinter. And that brings us to the present point, which is that horizontal line, which is today. And it's also basically the same day that overwinter activated. And if we move on, this is the future now. We see we have a few more releases coming up before sapling activates. So an interesting thing to notice is sort of the compression where we had many releases over a year and a half with Sprout. And now for these next upgrades, we just have a few releases sort of packed together. So one thing that was happening during this year and a half is, in addition to improving the existing Sprout client and repairing bugs and keeping that safe, in parallel, we were doing R&D and development for Sapling, which I hope you will hear about soon. Okay, so that's just kind of a tour of how the Zcash company got formed, and then kind of one visualization of what we've been doing schedule-wise. So now the next part is my list of the funnest bugs that we've encountered and fixed. So this list is chronological, roughly from the time that flaws or bugs were repaired. And I think it's interesting to just go over these. So the first two were design flaws in the original Sprout Zcash circuit design. The internal H collision vulnerability was a weakness which, if we had shipped, I think it could have been the end of Zcash, because it would allow somebody with sufficient pre-computation to reach a state where they could then counterfeit Zcash. The Fairy Gold attack was a bit more of an annoyance or a nuisance that could trick some people into accepting something as a payment from a malicious party, when in fact they would not be able to spend those funds later. So then we launched the next bug, the 1718, is something that wasn't really dangerous, but it was just embarrassing. So when we first launched, the code ignored fees for any transaction with shielded transfers. So that meant miners prioritized those in the lowest possible manner. And in fact, I think all of the miners running our default code would not mine shielded transactions, but there were some miners who would. So you could make a shielded transfer, and you would just have to wait a long, long time before it was confirmed. The next one, 1769, has the exciting warning symbol, which means we treated it as like a security incident. So we were concerned that it could be something that could harm users on the production network. And so, we had like all hands on deck analyzing it and determining how to fix it. So that was a cache invalidation bug. And so it would potentially allow a malicious party to there could have been a preparatory step where a malicious party could get different nodes into a different state. So they would have, like a different cache state. And then after that point, they could issue a transaction that nodes would react to differently, which could lead to a chain split. Moving along, 1823 was another embarrassing or annoyance bug where transactions that needed to spend multiple notes or spend two multiple output notes couldn't be generated by the client. So the user-facing impact is if you tried to make a transfer, sometimes it would fail, and you, as a user, you probably didn't know why, and the workaround would be to just transfer multiple smaller amounts in multiple transactions. So that's another embarrassing bug where the shielded transfer technology that is so amazing that we've been bringing into production isn't actually working very well for users. Then we have another terrifying emergency bug, which was a seg fault from remotely generated transactions, which is super scary. So it we didn't investigate too far, but it could have led to a remote code execution. And that was a really interesting bug because this is a case where we misunderstood part of the Bitcoin priority system, which is a sophisticated system for trying to determine which transactions to select for mining. And it's also related to how fee estimation happens in Bitcoin Core. And it turns out that there are, in the whole design of Bitcoin and also in the code base of Bitcoin, there are basically certain invariants that are maintained by the global code base or the global design. But if they're violated for specific components, then those components can fail. So that was a great lesson to run into. So moving along, when we get to the next 4 bugs, there's an interesting pattern here. So 437 was what I call a near bug. So there was an edge case in the pairing system, which is key to the zk-SNARK shielded transfer technology. And it turned out that this edge case was not exploitable in Zcash, but it was a case where we were just being protected by higher layers, when deserializing a transaction, our deserialization would prevent the problematic condition from occurring, but a lower level component could be vulnerable to that. Next, we have degraded network behavior. This is another example where we misunderstood some of the invariants and the networking part of Bitcoin, and we made a change that seemed sensible at the time, but it violated some of the timing assumptions about message order. And next, we have a libsnark buffer overflow. So libsnark implements the zk-SNARK technology. This buffer overflow is something that's really dangerous, but again, it's something that we were protected from in a higher layer. And then the last one on this list is a bug that was in the original design of Overwinter that we fixed before Overwinter was released into production. So I think it's interesting to see all of these bugs happening, and some of these are severe, and know that these are turning up in Zcash. There's likely to be new bugs as we move forward, and there's likely to be severe bugs like this in other systems. So rather than just focusing on the big picture designs and innovations that people love to focus on, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's still a lot of work that needs to go into making things safe. Safety and security have been a key focus for our company. And so far I've been describing bugs in our releases and how we've addressed them. But we also need to have similar safety in how we do research and design for new protocols like Sapling. So also it seems anecdotally like initially there were some really severe bugs like 738 at the top, which may have been a killer. And then some of these things like chain split vulnerabilities or seg fault vulnerabilities. And as we've moved on, so far it seems like we have fewer of those severe bugs on production, and now we're starting to hit what I am calling near bugs or pre-bugs. So This would mean we're discovering things that aren't dangerous directly to users, but could be dangerous if over time the system evolves such that some higher layer protection is no longer available. And we're beginning to repair lower layers to make the whole thing more robust. So I think as time goes on, so these kinds of bugs may exist in the wild and may not be discovered for a while. And then once they're discovered, they may be exploited. And over time, I think we're going to see in a variety of systems that some of these are going to have terrible consequences. So like Matt mentioned a case with another coin where there's a flaw of that nature. So I think so far we've focused a lot on this sort of base level safety of the code base. But as Matt brought up, if it's not usable and it isn't being adopted, it has limited impact. So we're starting to turn our focus now more towards usability and adoption. We want to have like a really clear feedback loop between usability and protocol design so that the two evolve together. All right, that's it. I wanted to give thanks especially to the Zcash Foundation for putting this on, to Paige for helping me with these slides, and also in a lot of these cases, especially for the severe hotfix bugs, we've relied a lot on the broader community outside of the company to like analyze the problems and to deploy mitigations. So I really want to thank the larger community for keeping Zcash safe.